Hello and welcome to In the Light, Growing Your Soul with me, Anna Isabel. And today I am joined by Phill Webster, who is the author of Glowing Deeper. Hello, Phill.
Hi, thanks for having me on.
It's an intriguing title. Tell us, what is your book about?
I've just so happened to have it right here. So it was it's the sequel to my book Letting Glow, which was released last year. And essentially, Letting Glow was about a grieving experience that I had, and then a very odd sort of supernatural event that happened around my mum passing, which really sent me down this deep rabbit hole of looking into sort of spiritual practices. So I really poured all of my grief into that first book, and then was learning also about these amazing things around sort of spiritual practices, mediumship specifically, and I just kind of documented my journey in book one. And then by the time I'd finished it, I felt like I'd learned so much that I just had this whole other book in me. So Glowing Deeper is sort of less about my own sort of personal journey, and more about sort of wider spiritual practices, but it does also lean very much towards mediumship as well. So there's lots of meditations in there and stuff like that. But then I was just thinking, what would I like to learn about when I was at these real sort of initial excitement stages of learning about everything spiritual. So I just kind of poured all that into it. There's like sort of history of the esoteric to sort of round it up, really. Yeah.
It was quite a startling experience that you had um, with your mother. Tell us about
Yeah.
that.
Sure. So we'd just been through the pandemic of 2020, and I'd been back in the UK since 2017. So I lived abroad for a long time. My mum lived on the Isle of Wight where I grew up, and she lived alone for pretty much all of those 20 years that I was away. Um, and anyway, so I came back based in London, and I would go down and see my mum on the Isle of Wight, and then of course COVID happened. So I try to do the right thing. I try to keep away, adhere to the government restrictions and all that stuff. And I hadn't seen her for a while, so we were going to see each other at Christmas, and then once again all the rules changed, and we decided against it. So just because of that, I hadn't seen her for a couple of months. So it was January 2021, and we would FaceTime every day. And on this particular day, it was probably the third time that we'd spoken that day. She answered the phone, and as she did, a man was leaning in from the other side of the screen, which just took me aback, essentially, because it was 10 o'clock at night. We were in another lockdown at that point, and the Isle of Wight, for anyone that doesn't know it, is quite a rural place. I sort of knew everybody in her immediate vicinity, don't have any other family down there, stuff like that, and I sort of knew a routine added to the whole fact that we were in lockdown. So I was like, okay, well, who's that? And she was, "Well, who's what?" And I said, okay, well, I just saw somebody. I just saw a guy. And she said, no, 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 there's no one here, and just kind of dismissed it and started telling me about her day. And I could always tell when somebody was with her because she would put on all these like airs and graces and speak a lot posher, and it was frustrating. You couldn't get a straight conversation out of her, and she wasn't doing any of that. And I thought, well, I guess I was mistaken then. I don't believe there was anyone physically with her, and she didn't acknowledge anyone or anything for the whole 45 minutes or so that we end up speaking. So I thought, well, I just it didn't sort of register with me in the same sort of way as it just didn't make sense. It wasn't like a logical sort of conclusion that I came to, and I just forgot about it, and I went to bed that night. Next morning, got the phone call that she was having a heart attack, and she passed away sort of like there and then, as I was on the phone to a neighbor. So through all of the initial shock and the grief and everything that comes with that, my mind just kept going back to this person that I've seen on the call. And I would talk to people about it, and some people would say, "Well, you're grieving." And I would sort of point out, "Well, I'm not. I wasn't grieving because it was the night before." And I'd seen him, this person. Um, and I've seen him long enough that I could describe him. He had like thinning grey hair, glasses, and looked like he was in his 60s. And then of course the other side of the fence, people would say, well, that was clearly a sign. That was somebody letting you know that your mum was about to pass. And over a course of a few months, I started thinking that that was the logical conclusion to. And the spirituality wasn't really my arena. I've always sort of had an eye on the esoteric, but only sort of like a passing interest from some stuff that had happened when I was a kid. I did have things like experiences happen when I was a kid, and I would put those behind me, and I just kind of put them down to imagination. But what this did was kind of made me really reevaluate all those experiences And it seemed to be a pattern. Like it was seen that every few years something would come up like this event, not as profound as that one, perhaps, but it was almost as though, oh, this has been a thing my whole life. I didn't really sort of take any notice of it. And it seemed like every 5 or 6 years something would tap me on the shoulder, and then I would be like, weird, and move on. But this really made me sort of look at everything from a different perspective. And since doing that, these two books come from that, and I feel that my whole life has taken a completely different direction to what it was doing. Yeah.
You also, in your book, talk about shared death experiences.
Yeah.
So tell us about that.
Well, that this is all again. I mean, so when I talk about this, it sounds like quite a lot, and there is an element that I'm aware that it sort of sounds like wishful thinking because, of course, we would like to think that we go on. We would like to think that our loved ones are still around us. And I am a very, despite all the things that I've learned about, I'm always a very sort of skeptical person when it comes to these things. I don't sort of typically just believe in everything because it's, in the category of spirituality or this kind of woo-woo arena. Um, but I did go home that day that I got the call that my mum had passed. Through COVID, it took a really long time to get down there through trains and then bus and sorry, forgive me, boats, and again everything was moving at half the speed. So it took all day to just get down to what was normally a 2 or 3 hour trip. By the time I got there, they'd taken my mum's body. I wasn't really sure how I felt about that anyway, about seeing her or any of that stuff. And then, of course, again, COVID was putting a lot of restrictions around things like that. So many people lost so many people. And there were all these things around funerals and what you could and couldn't do. But I got back to the house and I just remember this very, really profound, like overwhelming sense of, I mean, obviously loss isn't is the word, but going to that place that had always been, my mum was always there, like my whole life, essentially. Um, and just that was just something on its in itself, just walking into that house and it was silent. And I went to bed that night. I slept in my mum's bed. And just through waking up and just those horrible moments of waking up and remembering, yeah, like when we have those experiences, it could be for anything like a breakup or whatever, but for that second, everything's fine, and then it's oh, okay, it's not. For all of that, a dream came to me, and it was a very lucid, really like real powerful dream. And again, this wasn't my arena at the time. And I just remember facing my mum in this room, and the room was kind of full of swirling colors. It was like the walls were moving. And it was just very surreal, like a Dali painting or something. I don't think I've even used that comparison before. But she was standing in front of me and I was explaining to her what had happened. And I said, well, they're saying that it was your heart. And I remember her hand went instinctively to her chest. It was just such a vivid, visceral dream. Um, and she was asking me if I was going to be okay, and I was like, yeah, I'm going to be fine, And I was like, look, you've got to go. This is it. And I knew exactly what was going on in that state, in this weird subconscious dream state. And she left, and I woke up, and obviously was in floods of tears. But it just really stuck with me. It was such a powerful experience, as though, and I attribute it to a dream. But in all that I've learned about since, it's kind of a common experience, and people do talk about a shared death experience, and somebody might quibble with me over the fact that, well, that's not a shared death experience, it was a dream. But essentially there's a lot of research into it, and a lot of people talk to, around sort of hospice care and things like that, of being with the person that passed, and it was and consciously as well, people can be sitting at their desk and then suddenly be with that relative that's passing at that point and experience them, what they're going through. I believe that that's what happened at the end of the day. So yeah, there was just so much around my mum passing. It just really just sent me in every way in a completely different direction to where I thought my life was going.
It's very easy to dismiss experiences as just
Mm,
a dream, but we have to remember that there are similarities in the with the brain waves that we experience in meditation, deep meditation,
yeah,
in with mediums who are deeply in that state where they're able to receive or to communicate with spirit, and then again hypnosis, and that
yeah,
hypnotic state, the deep hypnotic state is similar
yeah,
again. to all of those, including um, that semi-awake, semi-asleep state, which is very different from the brain waves that we experience in deep sleep. And the
Yeah.
reason that semi-awake, semi-asleep state is because you're aware, but you're not aware.
Yeah.
And I think with you, given what you were going through, you were in a very emotional state, which means that it's unlikely that you had gone into a deep sleep.
Mm.
And
Hmm.
maybe we could say, well, it might still be a dream because it's REM, but REM waves are different again
Yeah.
from the the theta waves, the waves that we're actually talking about.
Yeah.
So it seems to me highly probable, especially as this is such a common occurrence,
Mm. Mm. Mm.
that this was let's call it a psychic experience
Yeah.
rather than a dream state. And I think a lot of people like you report on the intensity of the experience. It's not just the intensity of the emotion, it's the intensity of the physical feeling of it being an actual experience.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for breaking that down like that. I've never actually, you said something there that made a lot of sense to me because obviously in writing these books and researching, learning about mediumship and meditation, I'd never thought of that about not going into a deep sleep because I was waking up all the time and just kind of remembering over and over again. So actually, actually never thought of that aspect of it. Yeah. 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 So
You,
yeah, that was interesting.
you were just, I think that you were just in that perfect
Mm.
state
Yeah.
for the energy to come through, your
Yeah.
mother's energy to come through, or
Yeah.
her spirits to come through, and communicate with you. And in any case, as you say, there are people who have what we would call objective medium experiences,
Mm.
where they actually see the person whilst they're in an awake state.
Mm.
So this is a phenomena that we experience.
Mm. Mm.
And why wouldn't we?
Mm.
Because that connection with our loved ones is so strong.
Yeah. Yeah.
You can't just break that.
Mm. Yeah, I agree. I agree. That was really, I mean, that day was horrific. But all that came afterwards, again, I really sort of look at it like a parting gift from my mum in a way because and it seems that, oh, okay, now this makes sense. This whole thing makes sense. Why that's why I've always thought like that and why I've always felt excluded or just not part of that thing that everybody else seems to be part of. And yeah, now everything's sort of aligned. And I suppose it would have done, and I wouldn't have wrote those books if my mum was still here. And of course, I would love that my mum was still here. But it's interesting. It feels like that this was the kind of thing I was supposed to be doing all after all. Yeah.
You might be surprised at the number of mediums that I have spoken to
Mm.
for
Mm.
whom the stimulus to develop their mediumship skills or abilities,
Yeah.
the loss of somebody they love. And
Yeah. Well, that's it. Yeah.
it makes sense. It happens to
Yeah.
me. Years
Mm.
ago, also, I lost my father,
Mm.
and
Mm.
I knew that I had the ability to do it. I
Mm.
just hadn't done anything about it. And
Yeah.
suddenly, well, times now I'm not losing touch with my dad. It's
Yeah,
not,
yeah, that was it.
and
Yeah.
that was it. I was off. So yes, this is it. It's human nature
Mm,
to
mm,
explore,
mm,
particularly when you have you clearly were being prompted beforehand. It was almost like a preparation, like, okay,
mm.
this is what you're going to be doing. So get
Yeah,
ready.
yeah.
And then it happened. Did you ever discover who the man was that appeared on that screen?
I never did. I was writing, I think it was Glowing Deeper. It might have been Letting Glow actually, but I did come to a conclusion that I thought it was my dad, but I've sort of come around. I'm not sure. I don't really know. I was in this sort of period of one amazing thing was happening after another with all these things about mediumship, and then there was this experience, and then there was this spirit guide, and then there was all these signs, and I was like, this is like as much as I was grieving, it was also, and that's sort of where the title from the first book came from about letting glow. All these amazing things were happening, and I was really in the thick of it, and I just got the sense one night that that my dad was around, and I didn't sort of know how to put my finger on it. And I happened to be writing about that event again. So I just kind of put two and two together, and I thought, okay, I guess it was him. Then again, I don't know. Maybe surely I would have recognized him if it was him, you know. So
But
who knows?
you may have done, but you may not have been in the right frame of mind, because
Yeah.
I guess that this was more of it was a quick experience rather than them hovering there for a few minutes.
Yeah, I just thought it was somebody with her. She would have these carers come along, but they were never there after 6 p.m. And this was almost 10 at night. And the initial reaction was like, oh, okay, it's one of them. With and then she was no, 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 they were here hours ago. So yeah, but it was long enough, like I said, it was long enough that I could register with him. He wasn't transparent or anything like that. It just looked like a person with a
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, there was an experiment that was done, I forget by what university, a few years back, where they got a group of students to watch a basketball game.
Hmm.
And there was a point in the game in which a man dressed as a tiger
Oh yeah. Yeah.
in, and nobody saw it. When they went,
Yeah.
did you see? Nobody saw it. Why? Because their mind was on the game, and
Yeah.
so they blocked it out. And then they did the experiment again, and this time, because they were primed,
Hmm.
they saw it.
Yeah.
So I think there's something to be said here for the fact that this was an experience in which you were not prepared for it to be
Mm.
a supernatural experience.
Yeah, well, yeah,
You
definitely
were
not.
expecting that if there was somebody there, it would be a carer.
Yeah.
Very quickly. So it's very possible that it was somebody that you knew, like your
Mm,
father, but
mm.
recognize at that moment. So who knows? But
Yeah.
I would say trust your instinct,
Mm,
because very often the timing of things is significant.
mm, mm,
And the fact that you felt him as you were writing
mm,
that would
mm.
suggest that it's a highly likely um, interpretation of the
Yeah.
father.
Yeah. Well, yeah, perhaps. I remember at the time just having this smell. And I haven't really experienced that. And what is that? That's what do you call it? Claire Gustance or something like that. I always get those Claires mixed up. But yeah, I remember and I just spoke instinctively. I said, Dad. Like this smell came out of nowhere that was from childhood. And I thought and I happened to be writing about who was this person. So that's where I came to that conclusion. But then I suppose, yeah, maybe I've just overthought it since, and I've just sort of gone around in circles. And I don't know. It was an odd thing because I didn't really initially get any comfort out of it because I didn't recognize who the person was. But at the same time, if that hadn't have happened, maybe I would have still looked into this. I don't know, perhaps through the grief of losing my mum. But that seemed to be really okay. You need to look into this. That was a supernatural event that happened around my mum's passing, and it was like, what choice do I have? This has to be the path that I take now. So yeah, so here we are.
You should mention smell, because that is such a powerful thing with my partner's father.
Mm, mm.
We know he's around because suddenly it's like cigarette smoke everywhere,
Okay. Yeah.
and he was a heavy smoker.
Yeah.
And so we've had and we're looking, and there's obviously nobody in the house smokes.
Mm,
There's
mm,
nobody passing outside, so there's no smoke coming in.
mm.
There's We've had it in the car too. Uh,
Okay.
Usually in times when there's something very stressful that
Right.
he's going, and then we get the cigarette smoke, and so that's and I've had a client a while back. This is me as a hypnotherapist.
Okay.
Um, on Upon losing his wife, her perfume
Mm,
filling filling the room as
mm,
well.
mm.
So it's
And you experienced that as well.
no, he
Okay.
did.
Yeah. Yeah.
I wasn't with him when it happened, but he
Right.
came and he said, "This just happened,"
Yeah. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
so uh, this is it's a fairly common one, but we expect it to be uncommon because it seems like such a hard thing to achieve. But
Mm,
my understanding is that actually it's one of the easier ways in which spirit can manifest themselves is through scent.
mm.
So what an amazing experience for you as
Yeah,
well.
yeah, that was something. And then also I haven't seen my dad in 20 years. So and then a little bit later down the line, I did go into a spiritualist church and a lady described him perfectly. And I was she couldn't sort of put a finger on it of who he she said, I think I've got your dad, but and the way she physically described him, I thought, oh yeah, sounds like you have, but I don't know if he was alive or dead. But then everything she said afterwards was like, okay, well that's him. Yeah, 100%. It was probably one of the most accurate readings I've had from a medium. Um, yeah, it was really amazing. So I mean, it does look like he has passed. And it doesn't surprise me. He was a heavy smoker, heavy drinker. I think he had one lung. So yeah, I don't think he would have if he did if all of those vices didn't get him. I can't see how he would have got through 2020. So anyway, yeah.
So
Excuse me.
your book, we you talk about reconnecting with our original intention.
Mm, mm. Yeah, I feel that, I mean, to go sort of all esoteric on you, I feel that we do come here with a blueprint of a soul. That makes sense to me. I mean, I'm not the first person to talk about it by any means. That I feel that we have been here multiple times. I feel that we are part of a huge of a connection, a collective consciousness, and we are just individuations of that source or God, if you want to call it that. And I feel like I seem to be learning a lot more about that as I'm writing something else. But yeah, I also like one of the things that I really concentrated on in the first two books was I just learning about meditation when I was learning about mediumship. That was really the key to it. And I very quickly discovered this sense, and I feel like I've always had this sense since day one, but I would just be uncomfortable around it. I would just feel this strange sort of detachment when I started meditating, I started recognizing that I'm over here and this is all this. Like this is me worrying about bills or wondering what's on TV or look at that person in the red t-shirt or what, all this stuff that's just non-stop. But then realizing that I'm the core of me is observing all that. And that was really the key on so many levels to I think just that's so beneficial to all of us if we can get to that point. And I felt like I got to it relatively quickly, and it makes perfect sense to me. And then going into mediumship, that was really the key also to recognize that if I'm back here and this is all that I'm thinking about here, when something new comes in the middle, I recognize that as not from neither this or that. It's a new voice. And of course, it took a bit of practice to recognize that. But yeah, I feel that that's sort of what I'm talking about when I talk about our authentic self. Is this the observer or that quiet voice of reason that sort of steps in? And we don't recognize it so often because we get caught up in our day-to-day strives and worries, and I still do. I do a lot of interviews and I write these books like I'm walking around like Yoda, but I'm I've got to pay the bills too, and there's this and that. But yeah, just being able to sort of again, obviously, I don't need to tell you about this, but just sitting in reflection and meditation and being able to take that moment and just connect with that inner voice, I feel like is really the sort of key to getting in touch with that flame, that core, whatever it is that we come here as. And I found it really interesting. I was sitting in circle with in a development circle with my teacher, and she was describing it as well. She said, "Well, try and describe that. What is that? When you can get to that, when you peel all those layers away and you end up with this self or whatever you want to call it, what is it?" And I was, yeah, you can't describe it. It's there. But what is it? And it's like on a surface level, that sounds kind of, I don't know, just doesn't really sound like anything. But when you sort of take the time to peel those layers back and get back to that, that's really fascinating, I think. Yeah. Anyway.
I was just uh, pondering on that, and it's I think very difficult to describe that feeling. It's
Hmm.
so outside of what we might say is normal experience,
Hmm.
but it's from my experience, it feels like it feels like the inner me, the inner me that's unaffected
Hmm.
by the pain and by the worry and the anxiety and the fear, um, or even the passions,
Hmm.
you know, positive passions. It's the me that just is joy, and
Yeah.
that's how it feels. It's just that's the core me,
Yeah.
the just joy, and which drives the goals, the aims that I've set for myself.
Mm, mm.
But it's a very hard one to describe, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I get in a sense of what it is, and I feel that that is ultimately this, whatever this source of this whole thing is. But yeah, it is trying to sort of put it into words. I feel that we just don't really have the capacity. But I mean, I feel like you did describe it as best we can, and very nicely. But yeah, it is. There's a lot. It's a lot when you start peeling away at the layers. Um, and sometimes it gets a bit overwhelming. But also, I feel that it is what it is. You know, for one of a better term, we're here. We're doing this, so let's do it. And whatever this whole mystery is, and there's a lot of mystery. It's crazy. I mean, we do get caught up in our day-to-day lives, and we get complacent with this life, but you just start scratching away a little bit. There's a lot going on here, like time, and let's, that in itself is just like, where do you start? It's yeah, there's a lot going on here. Yeah.
You talk about developing a sixth sense.
Hmm.
In, so beyond meditating, what can people do to develop this sixth sense?
Well, I feel that that's just really the key to getting in touch with that inner voice, or whatever that was that we were just talking about. And I feel that I really do come back to meditation a lot. I suppose outside of that, just going with the your intuitive knowing, but I feel that again I have to bring it back to meditation, because I believe that there's a fine line between going with your intuition and going with impulsiveness. So you can sort of say, okay, go with that, but then being able to recognize the difference between, is that the inner voice? Is that the clear guidance that I'm getting, or is that just because I'm being spontaneous? So I feel that again, meditation really does help me at least decipher between those two. Um, but at the most basic level, and practical level, just not looking at your phone first thing when you wake up in the morning, just having that moment, or as long as you can, being in nature. I mean, we're quite close by from what we discovered. So for me, I go to Richmond Park and sort of spend time there to just get away from this whole other side of London. Which can be a bit overwhelming. But yeah, just taking those moments to sort of be with yourself, and just sort of have that clear connection with nature itself, and I feel that is, outside of meditation, that's really key for me. Yeah.
I think, in a sense, what you're saying is that we need to have opportunities for stillness.
Yeah,
To,
absolutely.
and people say, well, I can't meditate because I'm always, it's hard to switch my mind off. And
Yeah.
actually, the truth of the matter is that that is true for the majority of us, the
Yeah.
large majority of us.
Yeah.
Um, this is something that takes practice, but a step to that could well be just practicing some stillness
Mm.
by going out into nature, because you can get into a light meditative state
Yeah.
just that. Um,
Absolutely.
and monitoring your breathing is a really good way of getting into that stillness and
Yeah.
start to be able to meditate. So it's allowing yourself to be in the moment as well. There's a lot of talk
Mm.
that, but there's a reason for that, is that when we're in the moment, we are focusing on one thing, and that's a beginning of stilling the mind. So
Yeah.
you, by doing all of those things. And when you were talking about whether it's intuition or impulse, maybe actually there's something in both.
Mm.
And yes, we might not initially be able to discern, but they both come from something inside of us.
Mm.
So, for instance, working as a hypnotherapist, if I ask a client a question and they pause, I want to encourage them. What's the first thing that came into your
Mm.
mind? And
Yeah.
the is that we are so good at rationalizing our 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 feelings,
Yeah.
so they lose meaning or we dismiss them. And part of this development, I think, of a sixth sense is to not do that, to
Mm.
learn to not do that. Just listen to that gut. And we don't have to necessarily act on it, but listen to it at the very least.
Mm.
And
Mm.
then consider, oh, okay, so what's that asking me to do
Yeah.
from there? So
Mm.
maybe that's also another way of working out impulse, intuition. It's tricky,
Yeah.
but unless we actually start listening to that inner voice or inner feeling, then we're not going to get very far.
Absolutely. That's it. And I think that sort of going towards mediumship as well, that's the trick to that also, that's been what's the first thing that comes in. Just go with that. Even though it sounds ridiculous. And I know we're sort of going into another arena here when I mentioned that, but yeah, that's been the key for me as well. Okay, that sounds ridiculous, but I'll just blurt that out and somebody will be sitting there going, yeah, yeah, I know exactly what you mean. To me, I just feel like I'm, sort of just rambling. But I'm starting to recognize the difference again. Like I say, when those things come in, it tends to be like a stream, and I'll just be like, okay, this is what I've got. Hopefully, it makes sense, and so far so good. Yeah. So,
Yeah, and that's that is good advice for anyone who's training in mediumship.
mm,
Um, just go with it. Just
yeah,
go. We're always so afraid of getting it wrong, making a fool of ourselves.
yeah,
That blocks everything.
yeah,
And just like rationalizing, that gut feeling,
mm.
block everything. So it's really being open to that inner voice that we're talking about. So you have exercises in your book to help people with this.
Mm. Mm.
At this point, it's worth reminding everyone that the book that we are discussing is Glowing Deeper. Phill, I will be putting a link to that in the description box. How do people find out more about you or get in touch with you?
Yeah, sure. So the book's available essentially everywhere. If they don't have it physically in a bookshop, they can order it. Obviously on Amazon as well. And that's worldwide. It's available from all the usual bookstores. I've got a website, so that's philwebster.com. That's Phil with two L's. Otherwise you get some guy in Yorkshire. Um, and on there, I've just obviously got links to the books and then sort of musings over things that we're talking about, lots of stuff to interviews and things like that. And one thing that I'm sort of tentatively stepping towards at the moment is sort of a development circle, like an online circle. And I'm sort of I just posted something on Instagram for the first time today. Like I'm really sort of hesitant to step into this, but I'm like, okay, I've got to start practicing what I'm preaching. So I'd like to get a space where people can get together online and we can have conversations like this, sit in meditation and sort of develop as I would like to say modern day mystics. I don't feel that I'm a medium. I'm not a practicing medium. I'm still very much developing. So so I'm not going to be sitting there like some sort of guru or something, but a place where we can learn together and develop together. So that's kind of where I'm going next with that.
Well, that sounds fantastic, Phill. Thank you very much. I will be putting a link to your website in the description box, and I'm sure that some people will be very keen to find out more about what you're doing.
Yeah, I hope so. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you all for watching. Now, next time, we're going to be looking at the development of spirituality within an individual. Until then, goodbye.